Nicole. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to the Spring 2021 Brown Bag Series, online series this semester because of our current pandemic. And we want to thank the Office of Philanthropy and Alumni Engagement for its online support of the Brown Bag Series this semester. And especially today to Nicole Riley, who is helping with some of the technical support for today's presentation. My name is Marilyn Loyola. I'm an assistant professor of Spanish at Rockford University, and together with Associate Professor of Finance, Dr. Orhan Erdem, who is also with us today and just waved, we organize the Brown Bag series, and we're very excited for a wonderful series this semester, and we'll see what version and what it looks like next year. I want to just quickly give you an announcement, quickly announce our next presentation. So you have it on your calendars. It's in 2 weeks, Monday, February 22nd at 3 p.m. Dr. Kyle Edmond, who's also with us today, will be doing one of 2 teaching writing workshops. The title is Designing Informal Exploratory Writing Assignments. So please mark your calendars for that. It is my pleasure today to introduce our 2 speakers for today's presentation. Dr. Mary Weaks-Baxter is the Andrew Sherratt College Professor and Director of the Jane Addams Center for Civic Engagement. She teaches 19th and 20th century American and British literature and courses in rhetoric and in the Gender Studies program. Her publications range from studies of the literature of the Southern United States to a history of the role of students, faculty, and staff at Rockford College during World War II. Dr. Belinda Wholeben, is Professor Emerita of Psychology and the founding director of the Jane Addams Center for Civic Engagement. She's a former provost of the university and retired after 24 years at the university and now lives in the beautiful Northwoods of Wisconsin. She's an active member of the local chapters of the American Association of University Women and the League of Women Voters. She also serves as a member of the board of directors for the Nicolet College Foundation. Please join me in welcoming our 2 speakers, Dr. Mary Weeks-Baxter and Dr. Wholeben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I am going to share the screen, and I just want to make sure too that you all can see this. And I'm going to move you guys over so I can see what I'm doing here. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
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 Thank you. It's always good to get the responses. And thank you all for being here. Belinda and I really appreciate your being here for our presentation. And we want to give out a special shout out to Joanna Melodic from Archives. She helped with our gathering some of the images that we're using in this presentation. Some of the images too are from the Rockford Public Library Local History Room, and some others are from the Illinois State Archives. I want to give you a little context for thinking about our presentation today. We were asked to write a chapter for the Oxford Handbook on Jane Addams. What we're attempting to do in that chapter, which we have to have finished by this summer, is to look at the impact of Jane Addams' time at Rockford Female Seminary on her work at Hull House. And then we're extending that too, to look at the impact of the years at Hull House on current day community-based learning, community engaged learning. So we're really excited about our work on that chapter. What we're doing today is sharing a portion of that with you, looking at specifically Jane Addams' education at Rockford Female Seminary. Rockford Female Seminary being the precursor to Rockford College, and then Rockford College the precursor to Rockford University. Our work on this project too is a sort of stepping stone for some work that we are planning to continue. We have been working on a book that we've tentatively entitled The Jane Addams Effect. looking at the legacy of Jane Addams and the practical relevance of that legacy in the contemporary world. I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of context for thinking about Jane Addams. This is a picture of Hull House, and to the right too is, excuse me, a portrait of Ellengate Starr. Ellengate Starr was the co-founder with Jane Addams of Hull House in Chicago. Ellengate Starr was a student at Rockford Female Seminary for a year. She started her first year with Jane Addams, but she had to leave school because of monetary reasons. She was from the Durand area, so really not too far from where Jane Addams grew up. And she had to go to work, and she started teaching in Northern Illinois in the Chicago area. But ultimately, the two of them founded Hull House. And Hull House was a settlement house, called a settlement house. It was a significant part of the settlement house movement. Hull House was started in the Hull Mansion, which was gifted to the two women to start Hull House. Ultimately, the Hull House grew to a complex of 13 buildings, so much larger than just the home that was originally gifted to them. Hull House was intended to support immigrants who were living in the area. This would have been the area where UIC is located now in Chicago. And in large part, the institution was modeled after Toynbee Hall in London. Jane Addams had visited Toynbee Hall when she was in Europe. Toynbee Hall was a settlement house in London. It was a place where male university students lived in Toynbee Hall. They lived alongside the poor that they were attempting to support. Toynbee Hall was a response to the urbanization of the time period, industrialization, the poverty that resulted too from both of those. A settlement house like Hull House, like Toynbee Hall too, gets its name from the people that went to live on site at the settlement house. They settled there. That's where the word comes from. They did tend to be middle and upper class individuals. For Hull House, it was more specifically a female community of college educated women who came there to impact the people in the neighborhood in Chicago. Oftentimes, settlement houses were supported by religious institutions. Hull House, Jane Addams Hull House was not a religious institution. Jane Addams really fought against it becoming a religious institution. Some of the things that happened there too, there were clubs and activities that were organized. There was a kindergarten, there was a daycare facility for working mothers, there was an employment bureau, there was an art gallery, there were libraries, there were English classes, there were citizenship classes, there were theater, music, and art classes. In many ways, it's already sounding like a college environment too. But in many ways, I guess you can look at Hull House as being sort of like a community center with the people that were doing the work there actually living on site. Sort of our contemporary version too of a social services agency that offers people training, that offers people continuing ed and support services. This next slide, I'm sure that you all recognize this portrait. I did not realize that this is like an 1850s portrait. It was restored several decades ago, but it is from the 1850s. This is Anna Paxil. She was from New York State, and she started a female seminary out in New York State. And when a group of religious figures in this area decided that they wanted to put money toward beginning a men's college and a female seminary, she was invited to come west to start the female seminary. She was very interested in teaching as a young woman. She was very interested too in foreign missionary work, which is going to be significant in the founding of the school too. And she accepted this invitation in 1849. So it's a couple of years after the charter for our institution. And just to explain too, Beloit College would have been the college for male students and Rockford Female Seminary for the young women. When Sil arrived in Rockford, when she started the school, she did originally start Rockford Female Seminary in what is described as an abandoned courthouse building. And we didn't realize this, but the histories describe her first group of students as 53 girls who were under 10 years of age. So young women, very young girls at that point in time. But within 35 years, the institution, Rockford Female Seminary, had become a college in 1882. By that point in time, it had an endowment. It had lecture halls. It had 2,000 books in the library, it had a chapel, and it also offered the BA degree. Anna Paxil saw the models that she saw around her back in the Northeast as ones that she wanted to follow with the founding of the institution. She very much admired the Seven Sisters colleges, which essentially were like the Ivy Leagues for young women of the time period, including Smith, Mount Holyoke, Vassar. Sil specifically modeled Rockford Female Seminary after Mount Holyoke. And Jane Addams refers to the phrase that was often used in connection with the Rockford Female Seminary, that it was the Mount Holyoke of the West. Rockford Female Seminary was essentially a daughter of the New England Seven Sisters colleges. Sil retired not long after Jane Addams was at Rockford Female Seminary, and Addams graduated from Rockford Female Seminary in 1881. She did return, though, to the institution a year later when the seminary became a college. Essentially, a seminary during the 19th century was women's higher education for the time period. In becoming officially a college, there was additional coursework that students had to complete. And when Addams returned in 1882 to accept the BA degree, she actually literally was the first graduate of the college. Now, this is an image of the old campus. The old campus was located south of State Street. If you go downtown Rockford, before you cross the river, the old campus would have been down South 2nd Street off of Seminary. The street itself is called Seminary. This is one of the early images of the buildings there in the old campus. And here is an actual photograph, so you can see what the actual buildings look like. Now, during this time period, though, there was pressure against young women being educated in higher ed institutions. Edward Clark, a very well-known doctor of the time period, published a book called Sex and Education, came out in 1873. He preached that a higher degree for women would be detrimental to a woman's health and to her femininity. Women should conform to what he referred to as the law of periodicity. That is, during a woman's menstrual period, she should be in confinement and lie supine for at least 3 days. And higher ed would interfere with her reproductive system and with nature's laws. So there was this pushback against women going to female seminaries and ultimately going to colleges too. There was pushback against women living in dorms too. There was the belief that women weren't able to physically withstand dorm life. So this is just to give you some context for thinking about Jane Addams at Rockford Female Seminary. Jane Addams was from Cedarville, Illinois, and this is her family home. Her father was a rather prominent businessman. There was a mill on the original property of their home in Cedarville. He was 8 times an Illinois state senator, and he was a friend to Lincoln. So she came from a pretty prominent family, a rather well-to-do family. She wanted to go to Smith College, but her dad was on the board of trustees for Rockford Female Seminary, and he insisted that she go to Rockford. There was a rigorous entrance exam that students had to take, and Jane Addams and 6 other students passed the rigorous entrance exam and entered the first-year class, but there were also 9 additional students who failed the exam, and they were enrolled as conditional students. Addams too pushed back about going to Rockford Female Seminary because I guess frankly, she didn't think it would be all that exciting to go to college there too. She refers in 20 Years to Hull House as humdrum Rockford, suggesting what she thought about coming to the big city of Rockford. Here you can see where Cedarville is located. It's north of Freeport and a bit of a distance from Rockford. I have some images in here just to show you campus life during this time period. We don't have images that are like right specifically from the period that she was here. They are more from around the time period. This one is a dorm room from 1890, but we're assuming that this would have been close to what her dorm room would have looked like. Here you can see at the top, this is 1890 again, a picture of one of the artist studios. And at the bottom, gym class, another of the gym classes too. This is a little bit closer to her time in 1882. But just to give you a feel for what the classes would have been like here, weight training specifically. And here is the Shakespeare Quartet, a group of performing arts students from 1889. I bring you back to the Anna Paxil portrait to point out a few specifics too from this painting. You'll notice here, can you see my cursor? This is a drawing of the campus. Here, and I must tell you that in large part, I'm going off of what I have always heard, the stories that I've heard about this portrait. So some of you might have heard other things too, but this being the West, the representation of the West that she was traveling out to from the Northeast, and then the globe too, representing the fact that her goal was at Rockford Female Seminary to train young women to become missionary wives, to go out into the world, to make a difference, but by doing so, by being missionary wives. It is important to recognize too the complicated relationship that Addams had with Sill. On the one hand, Anna Paxil, she's got the globe is there, sending women out into the world, but also she was very much focused, though, too, on making sure that women stayed within the confines of what they were supposed to be doing as women focused in the domestic realm. Although that seems in conflict with the fact that she traveled from the Northeast all the way out to the Midwest to start a school. Also, there was conflict between Sill and Addams because of Sill's religious views. She pressured students to profess their religious faith. Back in 1865, so a little bit earlier, but just to give you some context for thinking about Sill's attitude about bringing her students to faith. One Rockford Female Seminary teacher wrote that one of the students was only one in the 3 upper classes who did not make a religious declaration. To resist the influences of the last 4 weeks, according to this teacher, means a terrible power of opposition. She, that is the student who is unconverted, braces herself for the expected assault, the assault from Sill. Indications are that Addams experienced a similar situation with Sill, but apparently she never repented. She was one, though, who was known for being a negotiator and could perhaps work alongside Anna Paxil a little bit more easily than others could. One of Addams' classmates said of her, quote, "Whenever difficulties with Miss Sill came up for settlement, most of us let Jane do it in representing them." So they got Jane to do it. You see those negotiation skills then being carried over to her work in Hull House, negotiating with donors, negotiating with politicians, negotiating too through her work in things like the Pullman railroad strike too. But going back to other connections between Rockford Female Seminary and Hull House, I think we do see the roots of that concept of women going out into the world too, through here with Anna Paxil, with the Globe, with the focus on women going out and changing the world, but for religious purposes. This quote from 20 years at Hull House is significant too, and showing the relationship that Addams saw between Rockford Female Seminary and Hull House. Addams writes in 20 years, "Perhaps this early companionship showed me how essentially similar are the various forms of social effort. And curiously enough, the actual activities of a missionary school are not unlike many that are carried on in the settlement situated in a foreign quarter." So the actions, what was taking place in both places, she was seeing some connections being made, but she also saw too the importance of Hull House as a place too that could give meaning to the lives of these college educated women who perhaps after getting out of college weren't quite sure what to do with the knowledge that they had gained. So Addams is interested too in looking at the impact of on the residents too, of what they are able to do at Hull House. This is again too from 20 years. She said, "I gradually became convinced that it would be a good thing to rent a house in a part of the city," so this is Hull House itself, "where many primitive and actual needs are found, in which young women who had been given over too exclusively to study might restore a balance of activity along traditional lines and learn of life from life itself, where they might try out some of the things they had been taught and put truth to the ultimate test of the conduct it dictates or inspires." So early on, she's seeing a connection between Rockford Female Seminary and what she's doing at Hull House. She also, think at one point in time even mentions that, as she says, the most sympathetic and comprehending visitors we ever had at Hull House have been returned missionaries. So she's making that connection back to the missionaries of Rockford Female Seminary. She did greatly value too what she saw in Sil as her unselfish spirit, her humble soul. And we see those qualities too as ones that are oftentimes connected to Jane Addams through her work at Hull House, through her mission in Chicago. Also, another connection that unfortunately there's not too much time to go into this, but the connection between the female community of Rockford Female Seminary and the female community of Hull House too is another connection that's made there. I've got a couple of pictures here from Hull House. In many ways, it looks like it could be a college campus. Here's the dining room at Hull House. And I want to read, let me look at my time though here. Okay. Just a brief description here of the dining room at Hull House and the place of Jane Addams here. Hull House would also bustle with constant activity. At mealtimes, Jane Addams would serve as hostess, dishing out food much as she had received it at Rockford. Another picture too I want to show. Here's women's basketball at Hull House. In many ways, the images that I'm bringing up here seem like the ones earlier with Rockford Female Seminary. A quick look at her report card or her transcript, classes that she took. You can see that she had what we would describe now as a very liberal arts education with a focus on the classics, foreign language, the sciences, some Bible, but actually, frankly, not as much as I thought that there would be, American literature, British literature, actually multiple languages that she's studying here, philosophy, but also an embedding in the sciences as well. So a very solid grounding in the liberal arts. We see this extended too in Hull House with the courses that were offered there and in the university extension courses that they started offering as well. And here, once again, she makes the connection between what she's doing at Hull House and what she did at Rockford Female Seminary. The best work in university extension can be done in settlements where the teaching will be further socialized, where the teacher will grapple his students, not only for formal lectures, but by hook possible to the fuller intellectual life which he represents. We're moving in now here to where Belinda's going to take over. I just want to add one last comment. I think this would be a really cool area to explore some more. For 10 years, Hull House Summer School was held at Rockford College on our campus. I think there's some fascinating stuff there. Once again, the connection between the two. I'm going to turn it over to Belinda.
Thank you, Mary. We'd like to explore with you the importance of Addams' education in terms of some of her speeches and some of her writings. So this first slide, the class of '81, is a very famous picture. And in case you don't know, Addams is the one under the umbrella. And I'm always kind of amazed at her haunting eyes and her distant look. Well, these students, class of '81, and other students participated in the Junior Exposition of 1880, where 17 classmates presented the school's first oratorical exhibition. The exhibition was attended by students faculty, family, and interested Rockford citizens. Bread Givers, the title of her speech, was Addams' first speech to a general audience and her very first attempt at being an orator. Now for a little background. Junior expositions were taking places at colleges all over the country. Rockford's first exposition was part of the seminary's transition from a seminary to a college. The exposition was also meant to strengthen the claim of equality with men's schools. So we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to 1881, when this was at the time of the second exposition. The female students at Rockford Female Seminary were invited to the junior exposition at Beloit College. The male students met the Rockford Female Seminary students at the train station and escorted them on a tour of the campus. After the exposition, the students attended a late supper party starting at 11 p.m. at the home of one of the students. The party went on into the wee hours of the night. Then the seminary students were escorted back to the local hotel where they spent the night. The next morning, the boys escorted the girls to the train station for the trip back to Rockford. Now, in contrast, when it was time for the Beloit students to attend the Rockford exposition, the boys arrived from the train station by carriage. They attended the regular dining hall dinner with many, many stares from the other diners, which were all women, which was followed by prayers and devotions. After the exposition, there was a formal reception where the boys entertained the girls with college songs, ending with "Good Night, Ladies" at around 11:30. The men were sent back by carriage to the train station with a basket of cake. The boys did have a chance to meet Jane Addams, who was a senior at that time, and were impressed with her. But their real discussion on the way to the train station was which of the girls that they had met was the nicest. Now back to the first exposition. As head of her class, Addams gave two speeches, an introductory speech and her required oratory. It is the introductory speech that has become famous. The purpose of Addams' speech was to discuss what educated women wanted for their futures. The motto of the class of 1881 was bread givers. To be a bread giver was to do good works, not only in the home, but out in the world. Addams used the metaphor as a framework for her speech, while at the same time foreshadowing two themes that were to become very important in her later life: service to the poor and women's rights, especially the right to vote. To illustrate these themes, I will quote from her speech. She, Addams meaning an educated woman, wishes not to be a man, nor like a man, but she claims the same right to independent thought and action. Whether this movement is tending toward the ballot box or will gain simply equal intellectual advantages, no one can predict. But certain it is that woman has gained new confidence in her possibilities and a fresher hope in her steady progress. We then, the class of 1881, in giving this our junior exhibition, are not trying to imitate our brothers in college. We are not restless or anxious for things beyond us. We simply claim the highest privileges of our time and avail ourselves to its best opportunities. But while we, on the one hand, as young women of the 19th century, we gladly claim these privileges and proudly assert our independence, on the other hand, we still retain the old ideal of womanhood, the Saxon lady whose mission it was to give bread unto her household. So we have planned to be bread givers throughout our lives, believing that in labor alone is happiness, and that the only true and honorable life is one filled with good works and honest toil. We have planned to idealize our labor and thus happily fulfill woman's noblest missions. Well, the junior exposition was a great success and received extensive coverage in the Rockford City newspaper. And we'll come back to the themes of service and feminism in a bit. Well, one of the goals of Addams and her classmates was to transition from Rockford Female Seminary, from a seminary to a college. In line with the policy of placing a women's college on an equity with other colleges in the state, Rockford Female Seminary students applied for an opportunity to compete in the Intercollegiate Oratorical Contest of Illinois, and it succeeded in having Rockford admitted as the first women's college. Addams, as their best orator, was the hope of her class. She and her classmates practiced endlessly, and Addams was ruthlessly critiqued by her peers. She was told that she dropped her voice at the end of her sentences, which was a feminine quality that was thought to be a threat to Addams taking the expected first place. Assured that Addams would be victorious, she was sent off to the contest while her fellow students prepared a hero's welcome for her return. At the contest, she competed against the not yet famous William Jennings Bryant, who, I quote, not only thrilled his auditors with an almost prophetic anticipation of the cross of gold, but with a moral earnestness which we had mistakenly assumed would be the unique possession of a feminine orator. Well, Brian came in second in the contest, and Addams came in a disappointing fifth. Addams, upon her return to the college, was greeted with wilted garlands and a teasing scolding from her friends that she had dealt the cause of women's advancement a staggering blow. And now we come upon graduation. The next slide. Thank you. Addams graduated in 1881, and you can see here the graduation announcement and a picture of Addams at the time of her graduation. Anna Paxil had selected Jane Addams as valedictorian of her class. Jane Addams gave a valedictory speech, and like all students, she also delivered her senior essay. It is her senior essay that became famous. She used the story of Cassandra, which is illustrated on the next slide, priestess of Troy, to begin her speech. According to Jane Addams, in her speech, upon the broad Trojan plain for 10 years, the mighty warriors of Greece and Troy fought hand to hand for honor and justice. Safe within the city walls, the stately Trojan dames ever wove the golden threads, the history of the conflict. To one of these beautiful women, to Cassandra, daughter of Priam, suddenly became the power of prophecy. Cassandra fearlessly received the power. With clear judgment and unerring instinct, she predicted the victory of the Greeks and the destruction of her father's city. But the brave warriors laughed to scorn the beautiful prophetess and called her mad. The frail girl stood conscious of truth, but she had no logic to convince the impatient defeated warriors and no facts to gain their confidence. She could only assert and proclaim until at last, in sooth, she becomes mad. Cassandra had the curse, always to be in the right, but always to be disbelieved and rejected. Well, Addams used this speech to discuss women's intuition. She argued that women could not take their place in public life, which was Addams' ambition, without gaining knowledge through reason, logic, and facts, through science. As part of the push to become a college, she argued for increased emphasis on the sciences. She argued that through the combination of intuition and the study of science, women would gain authoritas, the right of the speaker to be heard. Now, when you looked at Addams' transcript, you saw that she had quite a bit of science in her background. She was in part an exception because she was preparing to attend Smith, where she hoped to become a doctor. After Addams left Rockford Female Seminary, and as soon as her finances would allow, Addams gave support to the premise that women needed to advance their studies in science. She gave a gift of $1,000 to Rockford's meager, in her words, sorry, Kelly, library, with the stipulation that the money be spent on books about science. The Cassandra speech brings us back to the notion of women being different from men, in that they brought to public service the strength of intuition. From psychology, we learn that intuition, in combination with factual knowledge, can foster wisdom. In later life, Addams became a much sought-after speaker. She spoke in advocacy of many causes, but among the causes that are most well-known are women's suffrage, labor issues, politics, and peace. I'll end this section by asking a rhetorical trivia question. What speeches do AOC and Jane Addams have in common? Well, they both gave second nominating speeches for presidential candidates. AOC for Bernie Sanders, Jane Addams for Theodore Roosevelt. Next, we turn to some of Jane Addams' writings. At Rockford Female Seminary, a great amount of writing was required. The first-year rhetoric course required an essay every other week. This course was taught by the very popular Caroline Potter, one of the most popular teachers at Rockford and the personal favorite of Addams. She, like many of today's faculty, conferenced with her students and required multiple drafts of papers. As faculty advisor for the Rockford Seminary magazine, Potter encouraged to submit her first essay for publication in the magazine while Addams was in her first-year rhetoric course. Addams went on to become editor of the home items section in her sophomore year and editor-in-chief of the magazine in her senior year. So we'll advance to a photo of the Rockford Seminary magazine. Addams wrote many articles and editorials for the Rockford Seminary magazine. I've selected an excerpt from one of her editorials to detail here. Election day dawned on the community of excited girls who were supposed to be retired from the world and to be wholly absorbed in scholastic studies. The excitement was manifest at the breakfast table and steadily increased until chapel, when their feelings found vent in singing America with a vim that was deafening as well as patriotic. The polls were open from 9 to 3 for a mock election, and the ballots were deposited with each voter's leading motive attached. Among the home items, we have printed some of the reasons given. Not that they are very profound or wise, but we wonder if they are widely different from those which actuated the stream of men who were steadily voting but a few rods from us. In this editorial, Addams is not direct, but she implies the call for women's suffrage. She intimates the need for the expansion from the isolation of studies to preparation and participation in the broader world. This expansion foreshadows the expansion of the sphere of influence of Addams and the woman of Hull House, from a single building to a settlement of many buildings, to the city of Chicago, to the nation, and to the world. This excerpt also brings us back to Addams' interest in the differences and similarities in the interests and motivations of men and women. Addams wrote many other editorials on a broad range of topics, such as class loyalty, the conservative element at Rockford Female Seminary, friendship, self-reliance, the proper treatment of a roommate, the reading of popular literature, the study of personal effort, as well as suffrage and temperance. During her years at Hull House, Addams became a prolific writer. authoring 10 books and over 500 articles. Her articles were published in scholarly journals such as the American Sociological Journal and in the popular press, such as the Atlantic Monthly and Ladies' Home Journal. At one time, copies of Addams' most famous book, 20 Years at Hull House, were given to all faculty and students at Rockford College within the time that I was there, and was required reading for first-year SEM students. In 20 Years at Hull House, Addams gives a rather condescending and perhaps not totally accurate autobiographical account of her time at Rockford Female Seminary. She claimed to not hold much respect for the worth of her Rockford College BA degree. But many scholars, among them Louise Knight and Victoria Bissell Brown, view the strength and breadth of her education much more favorably. You're probably most familiar with her books, so I'd like to tell you about some of my favorite articles from the popular press, specifically from Ladies' Home Journal. And we'll go to the next slide. I see these articles and others as outgrowths from her work on the staff of Rockford Female Seminary. She wrote a total of 22 articles for Ladies' Home Journal between the years of 1906 and 1915. The first articles were serialized accounts of her work at Hull House, which were later the foundation for her book, 20 Years at Hull House. In 1913, she actually wrote a column each month titled Miss Addams. And it was through these articles that she approached several topics, such as improving the working conditions for child laborers, a minimum wage for female workers, the evils of unpaid prison labor, immigration, world peace, and suffrage. She later wrote an article titled, Need a Woman Over 50 Feel Old? And as I approach 70, 50, you do not need to feel old. I'd like to explore two of her articles related to suffrage. The first on the left is Why Women Should Vote. In Why Women Should Vote, Addams argues that women should have the vote in order that they might continue to perform their duties to family and to home in the modern world, where responsibilities like feeding their children and keeping them safe are no longer directly within her control. She gives many examples in which the actions of others, including government, influence the health and well-being of her children and her household. These examples range from education, the potential for juvenile delinquency, the exposure to the plague. In one example, Addams discussed the fact that babies were getting sick from drinking contaminated milk from the grocery store. She wrote about a daughter telling her mother that City Hall wanted to fix up the milk so that it wouldn't make the baby sick, but they didn't have quite enough votes for it yet. In What If Men Were Seeking the Franchise, Addams describes a rather humorous and hypothetical world in which women hold power and men are asking for the vote. Women would say to men, in the words of Addams, and this is facetious. Of course, I read this at the time when then President Trump was very much wanting a military parade. Our most valid objection to extending the franchise to you is that you are so fond of fighting. You always have been since you were little boys. You'd very likely forget that the real object of the state is to nurture and protect life. And out of sheer vainglory, you would be voting away huge sums of money for battleships, not one of which would last more than a few years at the expense of education. Women would further say to disenfranchised men, we have carefully built up a code of factory legislation for the protection of the workers in modern industry. We know that you men have always been careless about the house, perfectly indifferent to the necessity for sweeping and cleaning. If you were made responsible for factory legislation, it's quite probable that you could let the workers in the textile mills contract tuberculosis through needlessly breathing the fluff, or the workers in machine shops through inhaling metal filings, both of which are now carried off by an excellent suction system, which we women have insisted upon, but which is almost impossible to have installed in a man-made state because you men think so little of dust and its evil effects. And finally, the women talked about the fact that in seeking the franchise, the charge that men do not really know how tender and delicate children are and might therefore put them to work in factories, as indeed they had done. Well, the examples go on, and they're examples of ethics of care and municipal housekeeping, which are recurrent themes in Addams' work. What women care about and their approach to public service differed from what men cared about and their approach to public service, which takes us full circle to the speeches and writings of Addams while at Rockford Female Seminary. Next slide. I just put this on here because there's a fabulous primary source available to you in digital edition. At Ramapo College, they have digitized many of Jane Addams' correspondence, her speeches, her documents of many, many sorts, and I highly recommend that you travel there. Next, I'd like to come to the end of the presentation with a slide of Mary Ashby Cheek, smiling at the portrait of Jane Addams. Perhaps she was thinking of a quote of Addams, who was speaking as a trustee at Rockford's commencement in 1926, in which Addams said, "I beg of you sometimes to remember the old seminary, which turned out some of us in the older days." And finally, with the final slide, in my sentimentality, my thoughts go to many ceremonies at Rockford. And this one's for you, Bern, where we've shared the school song, Decus e Veritas, as our fond remembrance of Rockford, of which many of you have remained, but has turned out many of us. The refrain is Rockford, Decus e Veritas, deeply graven on each heart, will be fond, unwavering true, till we from life must part. And many of you probably remember standing in circles, holding hands, and singing our pledge to Rockford College, Rockford University. Well, we thank you, and we unfortunately didn't leave time for questions. So you may ask away if for those of you who can stay. And thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, both of you, for your wonderful presentation and that beautiful ending as well, Belinda. We did get one question about midway through the presentation from Barbara Simon from the AAUW. She asks, were there any female teachers at Rockford Female Seminary or Rockford College?
Oh, there were plenty of them. I think in large part, they did tend to be female.
Yeah, predominantly.
Yes, yeah. Maybe the occasional male, but yeah, it was very much a female community, even through the faculty as well.
Which is credited for Jane Addams' success at Hull House, which was predominantly female, and took a feminine approach to service.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead. Sure.
Mary, you were talking about the picture. So I was wondering, has any explanation been given of the book in her hand since she was so religiously centered?
I forgot the book. You know, I have never really looked up close to see if there's any writing on it, if there's a title. Has anybody else? I guess I just always associated it with the institution of learning for women. The role of education, that actually was something I should have brought up. Thank you, Diana. Barbara?
You have to Yes, just as a follow-up on my question about female teachers, then where did these women get their education in previous years to the seminary then? If the seminary was kind of early on in education for women, then where did the teachers come from?
I would say that the ones in the Midwest, like at Rockford, would have come from the Northeastern seminaries. I can't say that I have really looked into it that much as to where the women previously to the seminary would have received their educations. I assume it would have been more at home, but I'm not entirely sure. Belinda, do you have speculation on that?
No, I don't. But one of the things I wish, given time we had included, there's so many things we couldn't talk about, but there's a great picture of about 1890 and the faculty of Rockford Female Seminary. And they don't look much different from the students. Very much alike.
Well, and a little tidbit here too. After Anna Paxil retired, Martha Hilliard was the one who became the, I think that she was referred to as president. But after she got married, she had to step down from her position. And she went on to become the mother of poet Archibald MacLeish.
Oh, cool.
Yes, so a very cool connection there, but she couldn't remain in her position after she got married.
I have one other little question comment.
You.
I thought it was interesting that there was a picture of the ladies playing basketball before 1900. They must have started playing basketball when it immediately became a sport.
Yes.
And I just find that interesting. My mama, as a young woman in the 20s in Eastern Tennessee was on a women's basketball team, and people say, what? And I looked at that and I thought, oh yeah.
Yes, yeah. My grandmother was the same way back in the 20s. Yeah, she was very athletic and the women were out there playing all sorts of sports,
Hey, so
particularly
they had
basketball.
And the scores were often reported in the Rockford Seminary magazine.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question actually about Mary, you were talking about Jane Addams' resistance to having to declare her religious faith. Did Jane Addams associate that kind of that official declaration with something that could sort of limit women's rights or education, or did she make an association like that? And I'm thinking about Rockford College is not having a religious charter, for example. That's my understanding, right? Which was in some ways
Correct.
at the time. So is there a connection there that she saw between women's education and these two things being officially distinct?
My understanding is that it was probably more the influence of her father and her father's attitude about religion. And her father would not have been one to make a religious proclamation as Syl was suggesting. So that's my understanding.
Yeah, Addams talks about the fact that she did not proclaim that religious affiliation as being to her detriment sometimes at Hull House, because she could have raised a lot more money had she been associated with a religious group. But she chose not to. She felt that that was her own personal independence and the independence of Hull House, so that all would be welcome, that she did not claim, not just for herself, but for Hull House, any religious affiliation.
Mm-hmm. Things would have been much easier on her if she had.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara?
One quick thing. Did she make a decision not to become a doctor, or was she prevented from becoming a doctor?
Her health kept her from becoming a doctor.
Oh,
No. Good. She went for a semester to Smith, at which she did fine, but it was very exhausting for her, and because of her health situation. And at the end of the time, a physician recommended that she take time for travel and that she not remain at the school. When she traveled, and one of the interesting things is we seem to think that she graduated and then began Hull House, but there was about a 8 or 9 year span of time there between graduation and Hull House. Well, when she was traveling, she then discovered her first exposure to real poverty. She had seen poverty in her home area, but not to the extent of the slums of London. So when she went to Hull House, to Toynbee Hall and other places, she discovered that there were other ways to serve the poor and to live among the poor other than being a doctor. So she totally lost interest in becoming a medical doctor because she thought that was her route to serving and living among the poor, but it needed not be.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more. Stephanie?
I'm really interested and happy that Oxford is planning this volume, or this. Could you say a little bit more about it, how it came about? And I think that's wonderful.
A group of scholars are doing the editorial work. I think there are about 3 or 4 of them, correct?
Yes.
And I'm not sure that we know fully how it came about, but we were invited to participate. And it's part of a series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the series? Do you know?
Well, it's the handbooks that they have on.
There's a handbook that they've published about Dewey. And that one, I believe, is done. And there was another recent one that you mentioned to me, Mary. In our outreach to other scholars, we became acquainted with one of the editors of the handbook. And so she then asked us to participate because she knew of our scholarly interest, but then she also knew that we were from Rockford College. Who better to write about her education at Rockford? Us.
That's great news.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Belinda and Mary, for a wonderful presentation. I feel like there are several of us, I think, that want to continue to do research with you.
That would be a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Work. Thank you so much.
And you have a wonderful resource in the archives. If you've not been to the archives, please, I'm far away. You don't have the luxury of doing it. You're right there. Do it. Go see those archives.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe and stay warm.